So let's go ahead and open our Bible to Daniel chapter number 10. Daniel 10. We did our final exam. Probably should have called it the, what do you call that? The exam you take before the final? I forget what it's called now. Maybe it's called the exam you take before the final. Anyway, we did that last week. We kind of went through everything. We're not going to do a lot of review this morning. We're going to jump right on over into Daniel chapter 10. And we'll begin looking at the prophecy concerning the rise of Antichrist. That's what Daniel chapters 10 through 12 is all about. The rise of Little Horn. He's been introduced to us in Daniel chapter 7, the little horn that begins his career when he takes out 3 of the 10 horns of the 10-horned beast. And Daniel 8, told about where he comes from and his rise of power and some of the things that he does and all that. But now we're going to be looking at the rise of Little Horn to power. And I'm looking forward to showing you the correspondence between what Daniel reveals to us about the rise of Little Horn to power and the prophecy of the first 4 horses, or what is called the 4 horses of the apocalypse, and how they correspond. We'll touch on that today, probably. So we're pretty much done with this. You'll see this every now and then as we go along, but we're pretty much done with it. We're going to zoom in now on the head and silver portions of that dream image of Nebuchadnezzar. And let's just kind of get an overview of Daniel's prophecies, where they appear chronologically. In 608 BC, Nebuchadnezzar was given the kingdoms, and it was in 603 BC that Daniel interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Now, people get confused here because they think that 608 marks the beginning of Nebuchadnezzar's rule of Babylon. It does not. 608 BC marks the beginning of the time when God had given the kingdom to Nebuchadnezzar. So this is when God turned it over to Nebuchadnezzar. This is when Jeremiah declared all the kingdoms of the world are given to Nebuchadnezzar. The reason I bring that out is because in Daniel chapter 1 it says 2 years into the reign of Nebuchadnezzar he had his dream. Well, 608 to 603 is a period of 5 years. So God had given the kingdoms to Nebuchadnezzar about 3 years before he actually became the ruler in Babylon. So 2 years into that reign, he had a dream, or in the second year, I should say, actually, so it's about a year after he began his reign. He had a dream, and of course, we know that Daniel interpreted that dream, and that's been the basis of much of our study. And then, some years later now, 549 BC, so someone can do the math real quick, some 40 some odd years later, Nebuchadnezzar has died. He's off the scene. Babylon went through that transition period where they couldn't settle on who would be the successor. And so some things happened and it was a big mess. And finally Belshazzar becomes the ruler in Babylon. And he is Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. He is the son of Nebuchadnezzar's daughter, Cassandra, who married one of his top generals, Nabonidus. Finally, the kingdom was settled upon Nabonidus with the understanding that his heir would restore the kingdom to the lineage of Nebuchadnezzar. That was the concept. So his son Belshazzar, son of Nebuchadnezzar's daughter, of course that puts him in the lineage anyway, but in this way, the kingdom would finally transition back to a son of Nebuchadnezzar, is the concept. So he has his dream of the 4 beasts in the first year of Belshazzar's reign. And then, a few years later, he has another vision. This is the vision of the 2,300 days, the ram, the he-goat, and all that. All right? Then he has the vision of the 70, or he has the prophecy, or receives the prophecy, of the 70 weeks. He receives that in the same year that prophecy began to be fulfilled. 539 BC. So it gives you some perspective. And a lot of the prophecy we're going to be studying, especially in Daniel 11, begins in the period later. But he has the vision a few years later of Daniel chapter 10, where he sees a manifestation, a glorious manifestation of Christ that's very like the vision that John received on the Isle of Patmos. And then that vision, a lot of it, most of it's going to be fulfilled. The prophecy that follows it was going to be fulfilled during the time of Alexander's kingdom, all right? In 333 BC is when he started his thing. All right, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to fill in some blanks in your notes here in just a moment, but I want to give you one more look at the chronology of Daniel's visions, because this particular approach is more helpful than the other to some. Some like a graph like this. Some like the picture. I like the picture. It helps me see it better and see how it all comes together. But some people like this better. So for their sake, let's give them this real quick, and we'll be done. There. So all of you graphites, there you go. There's your graph. All right, you should have that in your notes as well, by the way. Daniel 10 is a continuation of the prophecy that Daniel received in Daniel chapters 8 and 9. So let's go ahead and take a look. Let's open our Bibles to Daniel 8. Remember, this is the prophecy he received in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar. During that time, or at that time, he received the vision of the ram, the he-goat, which the angel refers to as the vision of the daily sacrifice. Or I call it the vision of the 2300 days. Now we have shown that Daniel 9 actually continues developing that vision, because the part of the vision that wasn't explained to Daniel that he received in Daniel 8 was this 2300 days, or this business about the removal of the daily sacrifice. That part of the vision was touched on but wasn't elaborated on. He lays it all out very clearly. What's the ram, and what is the he-goat? What does the first horn represent? The 2 horns, or all that stuff. He explains all that very carefully. But he didn't explain the 2300 days prophecy, also referred to as the prophecy concerning the daily sacrifice. Well, that's what comes up in Daniel 9. So, some time passes. We come to Daniel 9, in the 1st year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, the seed of the Medes, which was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans. In the 1st year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by books the number of the years whereof the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. That's verse 1 of chapter 9. So he received that vision in the 1st year of Darius. Now that would be 539 BC. Okay? Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of the seed of the Medes. So we believe this is Darius the Mede. And he received this in the 1st year of his reign, when he was made king over Babylon under Cyrus. And this is the 70 years prophecy. He set his face to the Lord to seek and to understand that vision. Finally, the angel came and laid it out for him. He said in verse 24, 70 weeks to determine upon thy people. And he lays out the prophecy of the 70 weeks. Now this is a continuation of that prophecy that Daniel had received in the 3rd year of the reign of Belshazzar. So that's one reason I gave you that graph. You got to get some kind of a picture of this. He receives the vision, 549 BC, of the 4 beasts, 537 or 539, whatever it is. He receives the vision of the ram and the he-goat, and then 539 he receives the vision of the 70 weeks. I kind of messed that up, but that's why you got the graphs. You can go back and look at the graph. But anyway, so these things develop like that. All 3 of those visions, though, the vision of the ram and the he-goat, the vision of the 70 weeks, and now this vision we're going to look at today, the vision of Christ, all 3 of those combined together as one prophecy. All right? So we saw how those work together. Now we go to chapter number 10. This is now the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia. So we're 3 years later now. 3 years from 539. So that's where we are. 3rd year of King Cyrus. Daniel is going to see a vision of Christ. And that vision begins in verse number 5. Look at 5. Then I lifted up mine eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz. His body also was like the beryl, and his face as the appearance of lightning, and his eyes as lamps of fire, and his arms and his feet like in color to polished brass, and the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude. Now that's interesting. Later on, Angel's going to explain that, from the moment you set your heart to understand, I was sent. But it took me 21 days to get here. It took him 21 days to get there because Satan was trying to stop him. Satan was interfering. Satan didn't want the angel to get to Daniel with an understanding of all these things. Why? Well, because this war is going on in heaven over the kingdom. And all of this is about the kingdom. It's about the Lord's work in bringing Christ, his Son, into the world, who will rule the world with a rod of iron. And that's what this is all about. And Satan is not letting go. He's fighting. He's at war with God in this matter. And so that's what's going on here. And this vision of Jesus Christ is the cap, as it were, the capstone to the vision of the 2300 days. Remember in the vision of Nebuchadnezzar, of the dream, how does it end? It ends with the stone cut out of a mountain without hands that's cast down upon the foot of that thing. And it brings that whole thing down, crushes it all to powder. Well, that stone that came out of heaven and fell upon the feet of that image, that stone is Christ. That rock is Christ. The point is that Daniel's interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream concludes with a representation of Christ coming in power and destroying that kingdom, and in his kingdom growing and taking over the whole earth. Now we go to Daniel 7. Same thing. In Daniel 7, you have the four beasts. The lion, followed by the bear and the leopard, and then this strange nondescript beast with 10 horns, iron teeth, and so on. And then you have the little horn show up. All this, and then you have a vision of Christ, the Ancient of Days. Hair as white as snow and all this stuff, gives the kingdom to his Son. You have this glorious vision of Christ coming, who will destroy the Antichrist and destroy all the kingdoms of the world and set up his kingdom. So the dream of Nebuchadnezzar ends with Christ coming and ruling. The visions of the four beasts ends the same way. But when you go to Daniel 8, you read through the entire vision, the ram, the two horns, the he-goat flying across the earth, not even touching the ground, with a one notable horn, tears up the ram, beats it all to pieces. Then that horn's broken, 4 horns come out of it. Little horn shows up out of one of those horns. Then you have this saint speaking to the other saint, and the saint that said, and so on. And then you have the removal of the daily sacrifice. How long will that happen? 2300 days. How is that going on? But no vision of Christ. There's no vision of Christ in Daniel 8. So you go to Daniel 9, we've already shown how Daniel 9 picks up on Daniel 8, focusing on this business of the removal of the daily sacrifice. Answering the question, how long, from the time that the kingdom transferred from Babylon to Cyrus, how long from there until all this is done? And the answer, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people. This is very interesting to me because Jeremiah said you have 70 years under Babylon. When the 70 years under Babylon were done, God steps in and says, okay, now we got 70 weeks. Just right at the same time that the 70 years ended, begins the 70 weeks prophecy. So that, and there's some interesting reasons for that and implications from that we can look at later on. But you go down, he gives the 70 weeks prophecy, and it comes down to a focus on the removal of the daily sacrifice in the last of the 70 weeks, the 70th week. That's the focal point of verse 27, the removal of the daily sacrifice, which is what the Daniel 8 prophecy is all about. So you can see how they're related and connected, and one extends from the other and develops on something not explained in the first one. And now we come to Daniel 10, and let's go ahead and look at Daniel 10, verse number 1. In the third year of Cyrus, 3 years later then, king of Persia, a thing was revealed unto Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar. And the thing was true, but the time appointed was long, and he understood the thing and had understanding of the vision. Now that's interesting, because in Daniel 8, it ends with Daniel saying, I don't get it. Look at the last verse of Daniel 8. And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick certain days. Afterward I rose up and did the king's business, and I was astonished at the vision, and none understood it. See? But now at the end of Daniel 9, okay, I get it now. Now I understand. All right? So Daniel 9 finished explaining the vision of Daniel 8. And now Daniel gets it. He understands it. And we're going to go on now. In those days, I, Daniel, was mourning 3 full weeks. I ate no pleasant bread, neither came flesh nor wine in my mouth, neither did I anoint myself at all, till 3 whole weeks were fulfilled, or 21 days. And in the 24th day of the first month, I was by the side of the great river, which is Hiddekel. Then I lifted up mine eyes, and behold, and he saw the vision of Christ. All right? Now, in our next lesson, we really examine that. Right now, I'm just introducing our study of Daniel 10, 11, and 12. But if you compare Revelation chapter 1, beginning at verse 12 through about verse 19, or verse 18, and you compare the two manifestations there, I think you'll see there are so many points of connection. And even in the places where there's not a direct connection, for example, here it says, his loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz, whereas in Revelation chapter 1, his paps were girt about with a golden girdle. So there are some little bit of differences there that we'll look at, and we'll examine and appreciate the significance of those differences, because such differences do have meaning. But it isn't sufficiently different to force us or compel us to identify these as separate persons. There are too many points of connection that overwhelm any concern about some of these minor differences. And we'll bring all that out next time. I believe that what Daniel saw here is a manifestation of the same person that John saw on the Isle of Patmos. Bottom line for our purpose is, there it is. There's the manifestation of Christ that we're looking for. Each vision concludes with a manifestation of Christ. Where's the manifestation of Christ for the vision of Daniel 8? Oh, here it is. It's at Daniel 9, after Daniel got the complete vision. And you can see there was warfare going on, trying to interfere with him getting this vision. Satan was trying to stop this whole thing from being revealed, from being out there. But he failed, of course. So, Daniel 10 is a continuation of the prophecy Daniel recorded in Daniel chapters 8 and 9. Each of Daniel's prophecies concludes with a vision of Christ. The vision of Daniel 8 and 9 does not present a vision of Christ. In fact, Daniel 9 doesn't even present a vision. As a matter of fact, Daniel 9 presents a prophecy, but not a vision. Unless you can call seeing the angel something of a vision, which I imagine you could. The certain man in Daniel 10 is, I believe, the Son of Man of Revelation 1. And by the way, you getting these blanks filled in? I'm moving pretty fast, but you're quick. Daniel 10, 5-7 is the vision of Christ for the vision of Daniel 8 and 9. All right? Now let's go ahead. Daniel 11 and 12 continues the prophecy of Daniel 9 and 10. In other words, the case is, beginning at Daniel 8, we're in the last vision. Everything else is explanation based on the vision he received in Daniel chapter number 8. Daniel 11 and 12 continues the prophecy of Daniel 9 and 10. Daniel 11 verse 1, let's take a look at it. Also, I, in the first year of Darius, the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. Now, this can get a little bit confusing if you're not paying close attention. Because, you see, it's like this. You go back to Daniel 10, and it's in the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia. Then you flip back over to Daniel 11, and it's in the first year of Darius the Mede. Well, that's why we built all these charts for you, so you can kind of keep all this sorted out, all right? The first year of Darius the Mede coincides with the first year of Cyrus the king, or Cyrus the Persian. How does all that work out? Well, we've gone over it a couple of times, but it takes about 5 more times before it sinks in. So here's one of the next 4. I mean, we'll get 4 more after this. But here's what happens. Remember, during the time that Belshazzar was on the throne, all right, Nebuchadnezzar has died. We went through that transition. Finally, the kingdom settles on Nabonidus, who is the son-in-law of Nebuchadnezzar, married his daughter. They have a son named Belshazzar. A short time into the reign of Nabonidus, he has to go north, up into the area of Elam, or Persia. Why? Because there's a rising threat. Who is the rising threat? Cyrus. Because Cyrus and Darius combined their empires. Darius the Mede, who was the uncle of Cyrus the Persian. And there's an interesting story behind all that we won't take time to get into, but it's pretty fascinating. It's in your notes. But Darius joins in league with his nephew, Cyrus, and they combine the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. Well, this stuff's going on during the time, it began in the waning years of Nebuchadnezzar. It accelerated in that interim period when Nebuchadnezzar died, and there was question about who would take over Babylon. I always say, in those old world geopolitical dynamics, that would go on. If a king died, other nations saw that as an opportunity. Maybe this is our time. That kind of thing would go on all the time. So Nebuchadnezzar died, and then that sparked some things going on in the northern area, in the area of Media, or now Russia, and in Persia, now Iran. Those countries started rising up. Cyrus becoming the dominant ruler in Iran, Darius becoming the dominant ruler in Medes. Actually, because Cyrus helped him overcome Astyages. I'm getting too much into the details. Got to stop. So the Medes and the Persians. Well, Nabonidus got concerned because the reign of Nebuchadnezzar's empire was beginning to weaken in the north. So Nabonidus left Babylon, and he went north to Elam, to the area of Persia, leaving his son Belshazzar on the throne. And so his son Belshazzar was the second ruler in the kingdom. Now, the reason those guys did that is because if he got killed in battle, there would be no question about succession. That's why they would do that. So Nabonidus is up there fighting. Belshazzar's on the throne. In the first year, when Nabonidus left, that first year Belshazzar took over, Daniel has the vision of the 4 beasts. A few years later, he has this vision of the 2,300 days, the vision of the evening sacrifice. All right? Sometime later now, now we're at 539, about 10 years later, after Belshazzar got on the throne. Oh no. Darius led the Medes into Babylon and destroyed it, while Cyrus was finally defeating Nabonidus. That's what's happening. So by this time, Cyrus is the stronger of the two, Cyrus and Darius. Darius was an older man. He was much older. And he was, not, anyway, Cyrus was the younger man, the star that was rising, all that kind of stuff was going on. So he beats Nabonidus. Meanwhile, Darius comes down here. So when they got the kingdom, Cyrus comes down into Babylon. It's a huge brouhaha. Cyrus appoints Darius to be king over the realm of the Chaldeans. Remember, the Bible says that Darius was made ruler of the realm of the Chaldeans. Well, who made him the ruler? Top dog did, Cyrus. So Cyrus made him the ruler of Babylon. And Cyrus, of course, maintained his capital in Iran, modern-day Iran, ancient Persia. So that's the setup here. My point here now, all this is to say that the first year of Darius is also the first year of Cyrus. That's what that is. All that work was just to say that. I could have just said that, right? But anyway, that shows how the first year of Cyrus was the first year of Darius. So don't get confused here. In chapter 11, when it says, I in the first year of Darius, the Mede, even I stood to confirm him. But you go back to chapter 10, in the third year of Cyrus, wait a minute, what's going on? I thought we were in the third year of Cyrus, which would be the third year of Darius. How are we talking about the first year of Darius? You got to read carefully. This is really important because a lot of people miss it here, and as a consequence, they make some other errors. So go look at chapter 10, the last verse. Now, who's talking here? We believe this is Gabriel talking. You can go back through the whole chapter 10, and follow it carefully, and you'll see that it's Gabriel, the one that's speaking. And he says, but I will show thee that which is noted in the scripture of truth. That's chapter 10, verse 21. And there is none that holdeth with me in these things but Michael your prince. You go back into the context, you'll see Michael and Gabriel are the two top dog angels we're talking about here. And Gabriel's the one speaking. And Gabriel says, I'm going to show you some things. And then chapter 11, verse 1, he says, also, I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. In other words, we're not chronologically going back to that. What's happening is Gabriel is letting Daniel in on something. He's letting Daniel in. He's setting the table for what he's going to talk about next. He's going to talk about that prophecy that this angel had given Daniel in the first year of Darius. The prophecy he received in the first year of Darius. All right? Which is chapter 9, verse 1. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus. You get it? You begin to see how this works? So that's all the angel's doing here. Is that, you remember Daniel, when in the first year of Darius, I gave you the prophecy of the 70 weeks. Well, at that time, I was also standing to confirm Darius in his position there in Babylon. I was there to confirm him. Now that's really interesting because it tells us that God has appointed his great angels to do stuff like this, to establish kings and to take them down. I mean, that's what they do. And so it gives you that insight. But so you get the picture in terms of how this is developing. You know, Gabriel comes to him and the third year of Belshazzar and gives him the vision of the ram and the he-goat and gives him the vision of the time in history when we would move from the golden head, which is Babylon, to the silver upper torso, which is Persia. So the angel comes and tells him about that. And then he comes in at the time of that transfer. When that prophecy is being fulfilled, he shows up to strengthen Darius' appointment as the ruler in Babylon and to give Daniel the 70 weeks prophecy. Now he's come back 3 years later. And he gives him the rest of the story, if you will. And now Daniel has the vision of Christ that concludes that whole thing. And the whole picture from Daniel 8 through Daniel 10 is this picture of how Daniel's getting bits and pieces broken up. And there's a fight going on because Satan is resisting, and there's a power play going on, and there's a lot of spiritual activity going on, warfare, while on the earth men are, this is going on over here in Elam with Cyrus against the army of Nabonidus, and then Darius is coming down over here into Babylon. I mean, there's a lot of exciting stuff going on here in the spiritual realm, corresponding to the events that are going on in the physical realm. It's just amazing to me. But just so you understand that when you're looking at Daniel 11 verse 1, you're not reading something that Daniel did. It's not Daniel who says, I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and strengthen him. Daniel didn't do that. The angel Gabriel did that. There's been no change of voice between verse 21, which concludes chapter 10, and verse 1 of chapter 11. The same person is talking. And so this is Gabriel saying this. Now here's where it's significant. Verse 2, and now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. So now we're going from the time that Persia started, the Medes and the Persians, and Daniel, the angel is giving a swift overview. 4 kings will rise in Persia. The 4th is going to be more powerful than any of them. That king is going to stir up all the realm against the king of Grecia. And that's going to lead, of course, to the rise of Greece. Verse 3, and a mighty king shall stand up, and shall rule with great dominion, and to do according to his will. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be divided toward the 4 winds of heaven. But just in case you need a little more encouragement to believe me when I say, this is a continuation of the prophecy of Daniel 8. Did you catch this? It clearly is a continuation of the prophecy of Daniel 8. Persia rises. Greece comes up against it. The king destroys them, but then he's broken when he stands up, and 4 kings come out of that. That's the ram and the he-goat, isn't it? It's almost a recapitulation of the vision of the ram and the he-goat. Daniel 11 is a continuation of the prophecy that was given to Daniel in Daniel chapter 8. Okay, that's what's going on here. And now we go to verse 5. And the king of the north shall be strong, and then it just goes from there. And that's going to be saved for later. We're just introducing this right now. And the point I want to make right now is that from Daniel 8 through Daniel 12, you're talking about one prophecy. And that's important because the 4 beasts rising out of the sea, they are related, of course, to this, but those are the focus of that prophecy is on geopolitical developments that rise up, that develop to the place where Little Horn arrives. When you go to Daniel 8 through 12, you're looking specifically at the rise of power of the Antichrist. Not so much the geopolitical alignments of the nations around behind that as a backdrop, but him specifically. This is the prophecy of the Antichrist. So the angel Gabriel informs Daniel that he stood to confirm Darius the Mede when he rose to power. It continues from Daniel 10:21. So the narrative is unbroken. This means Daniel 11 and 12 continues the prophecy begun in Daniel 8. All right. Daniel 11 and 12 present the prophetic history of Little Horn. That's what it is. It's a prophesied history of the rise of Little Horn. Daniel 11, 1-4 sets up the beginning of the prophecy and marks it as beginning with the 70 weeks prophecy, which began in 539 BC when Cyrus made the decree that God's people could go and rebuild Jerusalem. The decree to rebuild Jerusalem. That started the 70 weeks prophecy. Daniel 11 verses 4-20 provides a summary overview of the history of the kingdoms of the south and the north as things will develop to the arrival of Little Horn. Boy, it's fascinating. When we get into that and we start looking carefully at the language of the prophecies, you will be astounded at how perfectly the overview of history given to us in prophecy lines up with the actual historical events as they occurred. Now, next week we learn 6 rules that guide us while we're interpreting this prophecy and any other prophecy, and the 3 key historical dates that we can establish with authority that help us organize the chronology of events that lead to the arrival of Little Horn. And we'll be doing that work next week. And then in verse 21 of Daniel 11, at that point you have a kind of juncture. Now it goes to the prophecy of Little Horn from his rise to power to his death. So the first section gives the historical backdrop, if you will, of the wars that were going on between the south, and that was Egypt, and the north, and that is Syria, with Israel in the middle, and the power struggle that was going on between those two kingdoms. And out of one of those two kingdoms, little horn will rise. Turns out it's going to come from the north. That's what Daniel 11 makes very clear. So one thing Daniel 11 serves to help us with is to know which of those four horns is the origin of little horn. Remember, Daniel 8 leaves us with from one of those four horns. Daniel 11 narrows it down and tells us it's from the southern horn, if you will. The horn that represents the kingdom of Assyria or Syria, which at that time would be Syria, Lebanon. They were connected together at that time. So Daniel 11:21-45 is the prophecy of little horn coming to his rise, arising to power, and then from there going on and committing the abomination of desolation. Daniel 12 prophesies the continuation of little horn and the conclusion of the times of the Gentiles. Now that's interesting because Daniel's prophecies consistently take us right up to the what we call the middle of the week, right up to the point where little horn commits the outrageous sin, the abomination of desolation that we've heard so much about, also called the transgression of desolation. And so the abomination that maketh desolate is another name for it. Jesus pulled Daniel's prophecies together, his language together, and made it one expression, abomination of desolation. He did that in Matthew 24, verse 15, spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Very, very brilliant. Who's surprised? But he used, see, Daniel calls it the transgression of desolation, and he calls it the abomination that maketh desolate. That's the way Daniel refers to it. Jesus comes along, he says the abomination that maketh desolate. He pulled those two together and made it clear both of those things are the same thing. Okay? Spoken of by Daniel the prophet. So, Daniel's prophecies take us all the way to that event. That's the signature event. Now, it does allude to what happens after in a kind of, and then Jesus is going to come and destroy everything, but it doesn't detail out the period from the abomination of desolation to the consummation. It doesn't give any detail for that period. But it gives incredible detail to the period from Cyrus leading up to the arrival of little horn and the abomination of desolation. Amazing detail. No detail from there forward. Another curiosity is Daniel 11 tells us that little horn dies at the middle of the week. He's killed. He's cut off. But in Daniel 12, there's a little kind of a subtle hint that he continues for 3.5 more years. So we're kind of going, huh? He's either dead or he isn't. You know, what's going on here? So it's just fascinating how all this works out. And we'll be looking at all those things and unraveling those mysteries and explain all that as we go. So in conclusion, in the next lesson, we're going to examine Daniel's vision of Christ. And then in succeeding lessons, we're going to prepare you for our study of Daniel 11 by doing this first, explaining the 6 principles for rightly interpreting Daniel 11. I think this is going to be one of the most important lessons in our series. If you get hold of these 6 principles and understand them rightly, then it's going to equip you to work through any prophecy in the Bible and arrive at the right kind of conclusion instead of some crazy knucklehead thing and end up with another theory that is unbiblical. After that, we're going to look at the 3 key historical markers that help us rightly understand the prophecy of little horns appearing and rise to power, and that'll be followed by a detailed study of Daniel 11, and so we are El Duno. Okay? I was going to go through this, but we're done. Let's stand. Or I'm out of my time. That's just a trick teachers have. Just in case I get done early, that's where I would go next. But I didn't get done early. We got done on time. Father, we're thankful. We do praise you. We ask you now, Lord Jesus, to help us understand these things and to be able, Lord, like Daniel, he desired to understand these prophecies. And we want to understand these things, Father, so we can be faithful witnesses to the truth, and so that we can see and be aware and how rightly to understand the events of our day. In Jesus' name I pray and ask you for these things. Amen. God bless you. You're dismissed.